All right, time for another look at the latest developments in the Australian property market, where, as always, there's plenty to discuss. And joining us to share her expert insights is the principal of Michelle May Buyers Agents and host of the Buy Your Side podcast, Michelle May. Michelle, welcome to the Savings Tip Jar.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us, Michelle. So we'll kick off with what's happening, particularly in Sydney at the moment, where you're based. So apartment construction woes. There's been a lot of talk in the media recently and just online and in social media about these apartment buildings that are quite literally crumbling to pieces, and owners aren't happy. So what's your take on this, and what are you advising clients who want to buy an apartment, especially within that sort of inner ring where you service?
Tread very carefully is what would be my number one advice. I actually have a rule within my business that we do not actually generally advise clients to buy anything less than 5 to 7 years old, because we really want to see how the building is settling, the quality of the build. But also, if there are issues, how is the strata community, the owners community, dealing with it? It's one thing having issues. There's no such thing as a perfect building. I don't believe that is possible, because you're working against the forces of nature, whether that's an apartment or a house. But it's crucial to understand, what are the issues, and how are the strata committee communicating with the builder and developer, and how are they working through their issues. So with so much choice in the market, even with a lack of stock, there are plenty of apartments to go for. I would always prefer to go something with history, so you actually understand what you're buying into, because you're not just buying that shiny apartment, with scatter cushions. You're actually buying into the community of the building. And if that building is predominantly investor-owned, foreign investor-owned, for example, you'll find that there is no follow-up on issues. There's a lot of movement between, tenants, etc. And then you will literally be working on your own, trying to solve these problems. And that then becomes a massive headache. That really, is that what you want in your life? Not only that, but it will very much affect the value of the property moving forward. And it will deter other buyers who will do their due diligence from purchasing your property. So you could be left being stuck in a property that you are unable to sell, or only able to sell at a loss. So that would be my word of warning, please buy something with a bit of history.
Michelle, I'll just get your current take on, what's happening in the market at the moment. Someone who's at the coalface of it all. What are some of the current sort of trends or themes that you're seeing? What are the things you're hearing from clients? And, and we're also hearing a lot about how there's been quite a few fewer listings at the moment. But then we saw there was a bit of an unseasonal surge in listings over winter. So, what's driving this, and what's your overall take on it all?
It's very interesting how quickly a market can change, right? It never ceases to amaze me from one week to the next. And by the time, we are in the market every day looking for our clients. By the time it gets reported in the media, there is a bit of a delay. So obviously, the lack of stock is from vendors being unsure as to, it's sort of a chicken and the egg scenario, because if they don't see the properties that they want to buy, they're unsure of listing their own property, first of all. Then there's obviously the massive impact that the interest rates have had. There's a ton more investor-owned listings that we see, much more so than before, and not vacant ones either. We're seeing a lot of listings that still have tenancies in place until next year even. So if you're an owner-occupier looking to buy, there's a quite a large proportion of the market that is not suitable for you, because you need to move in. And obviously, with a tenancy in place, you can't just turf out the tenants. So we're seeing that. I also find that the actual quality of the properties is lackluster, because I think a lot of the investors are, if they have multiple investments, are offloading, the underperforming ones. And as buyers agents, we only go for the A-star quality properties, because at the end of the day, this is the value add that we bring to our clients. We want to show the difference between apartment A, apartment B. Why would you buy this one and not that one? What we are finding is also with houses is that the family homes that are renovated are still performing extremely well. It is not unusual to see, 8 to 10 registered bidders at auction. Very strong results still there. And you're seeing that in the clearance rates week on week. We've had very high clearance rates. So it's a combination of a lot of things. And it also very much depends on what you're looking for, what budget you're in, and what area you're in, So in high density areas, you're still able to pick up, a reasonably priced apartment because there's more choice. However, in areas, for example, like Newtown and Enmore, where there's typically not that many apartments, you're still having to pay quite a fair, strong price in order to beat the competition. So I think as a buyer, it's very confusing because when you read the media, people tend to talk about the market in Australia or the market in Sydney, but there's no such thing as one market. There are all these little micro markets that are all sort of operating independently. So if you are interested in an apartment in the inner west, be mindful that the market in Marrickville might be slightly different to the market in Summerhill, for example. So you really need to do your research and understand that what you've got in front of you, how good is the property that you're looking at, and how strongly do you want to compete for it? And that you can only do that with a lot of research, starting with your strata report.
Yeah, that's a really important one. I'm going through that journey myself up here in Brisbane, and a lot of what you said rings true up here as well. It might not be such a crazy market as Sydney, but yeah, there's some common themes that I guess everyone can kind of take away. What I want to ask too is, what's the typical profile, I guess, of a client that comes to you? You service, within a 10K radius of the CBD. I think it's easy to stereotype about the type of buyer that comes in there, but what type of demographic, I guess, and what are they looking to buy, and what are they asking of you?
Well, what are they asking of me? Look, listen, it's there's no such thing as a typical buyer for the people that we work with. We do work predominantly with owner occupiers versus investors. However, they can be first home buyers, and first home buyers come to us typically going, we don't know what we're doing, and we understand that we don't know what we're doing, and this is a massive risk. And I think that's very, very good, because the first purchase you make is that stepping stone on the, that first step on the property ladder. It's the most important purchase you'll ever make. If you buy it done, you can be left with, a headache and a loss of seriously a lot of money. So understanding that they need an expert on their side to not only deal with the market and the agents, but also what happens next. I always say finding the property is the easiest part of the equation, whereas a lot of people already struggle with that, because in Sydney, there's very much an off-market market as well, not just what you see on Domain and Real Estate and all the big portals. There's also a market that's just happening between agents, and because we have those relationships, we are able to get those deals done before those listings ever make it to market. So those are the first home buyers, but we also work with empty nesters who are downgrading, who haven't bought a property in, say, 20, 30 years. So we provide context to the market, showing them outside the box thinking. So yes, you want to live in Summerhill, but have you considered Dulwich Hill? Or, you want to live in Marrickville, but look, Marrickville is in the top 10 coolest suburbs of the world in Time magazine. I think Ashfield might be a good option for you as well, because it has a very similar vibe, is slightly more affordable. So we provide a lot of context from that perspective as well. But we also work with people who, Sydney is a very international city, with people who've just landed into this country and who go, I don't know how this all works. Please help me. Interstate, we work with expats who are working in Dubai or in Hong Kong and have plans to move back. And so we help them find their family home ready for them to move into. We do work with high profile people on occasion, but the majority of our clients are just everyday people who just understand that this is a massive investment to make. And, they just need help with someone who does this every day. I mean, I've been buying property since I was 22. I used to be a property flipper. I train buyers agents, and even I have to admit that with all this experience, you still have to take each transaction as it comes and understand there's a different sales agent, there's a different vendor in play, and there's all these different motivations. And we have to strategize every time to make it work for our clients. So yeah, I mean, anyone I think can benefit. Even people who've bought multiple properties can benefit from what a buyer's agent can bring to the equation.
Michelle, the general consensus seems to be at the moment that we are at or near the peak in this interest rate cycle. And if that's the case, how do you think that could impact the market? I mean, there's some people that say, if the RBA rate hikes stop, that will give sellers more confidence to list their properties on the market, which will increase supply and maybe drive prices down. Then others will say, it will give buyers more confidence and they'll drive prices back up. What's your take on the matter?
I always like to take a step back from it all, because at the end of the day, you can focus on interest rates and the market and trying to pick up a bargain all you like. But what is the reason you're buying a property for? It's because you want a home for your family, or your first, you're moving from renting into purchasing for the first time. So it's about your life, and you can try and time the market as much as you want. But I think you first need to look at how long do you want to hold on to the property for? Because as everyone knows, the property market comes up and goes back down, but the overall trajectory is always up in the long run. So the idea is, if you want to hold on to a property for less than 5 to 7 years, I'd say don't bother, because the cost of acquisition and the cost of getting out is extremely high. In New South Wales, we have stamp duty, we have the cost of a buyer's agent, of a real estate agent, of a conveyancer. If you add up all those costs, and, if you look at any capital growth there is to be had during that short period of time, you might actually lose money and you may consider renting instead. I think you've got to look at your property as a long-term thing. And as long as you've got your ducks lined up in terms of being able to pay the repayments, and this is where a really good broker comes into play, you've got to do your finances, and don't fib to yourself about how much you spend on Uber Eats and all this kind of stuff. You've got to be honest, and go, can I actually afford this? Is this a good idea? Because you don't want your property to be a noose around your neck. So going back to your question about stock and what these interest rates have done, I think there was a lot of buyers trying to purchase before the next interest rate rise. They were like, okay, if I buy now before the next rate increase, I can borrow this much, because I know that if it goes up again, I will be able to borrow less. But that's also influenced by, in New South Wales, for example, by grants that are driving more buyers to the market as well. We had, previously, if you bought under 1.5, you could choose the land tax option. That's now changed again, and there's other first home buyers incentives. So there's all these different factors as to why people choose to buy or not to buy. The real estate market is also seasonal. Is linked with school holidays, funnily enough. So agents tend not to list properties during the school holidays or have an auction during the school holidays, because I don't know what it's like in other states and cities, but in Sydney, a lot of people go away, So, of course, they want to draw in as many people as possible. So you'll find that the new listings dry up for a certain number of weeks prior to the school holidays, and then it ramps up again. Also, coming into spring, there's naturally always more listings because, it shows your property in a better light, particularly if you're south or west facing. You're better off showing it during the spring months. And then it tapers off again towards Christmas. January is typically a dead zone. And then there you get this pent-up demand again, from people who are going, I need somewhere to live. Because very often the purchase of a property is linked with a big life event. You have a new job, you're about to have a baby, you're having another baby, potentially, your parents have passed away, so you need to sell. You've got a bit of money from this, so you're moving to a big, there's all these, it's not just, I'm just buying a property. It's always linked with something in someone's life that makes them have this need. And that natural state of the market, as we call it, that will always continue regardless of what the government's doing, regardless of supply levels and demand levels, because people have a basic need for somewhere to live.
For sure. And we'll get your take on the auction or properties going to auction at the minute, because there's a bit of talk about clearance rates being high, and then recently we've seen them come down again, particularly in Sydney. That just could be like the seasonal factors like you were talking about. But what do you, is there sort of one method of buying that you're advising clients to use, or is it a bit of a mixed bag, or is it more property dependent, like whether that goes to private treaty or auction? And what are your general what's your general take on auctions, and what are your strategies at auction?
You're asking me to give away my trade secrets. Look, when it comes to Sydney, particularly that inner 10K radius, it's very much a lot of auctions. They want to draw in the crowd, have a 4-week campaign, two opens during a week, usually Saturday and then say a Wednesday afternoon or a lunchtime. For a buyer, it's very important to understand the motivations, like I mentioned before, of not only the vendor, but also the agent. And this is where us as buyers agents, we have that experience, we have those relationships. So we know which agents will run everything to auction because they simply can't do a deal to save themselves. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but it's actually true. They are just on autopilot, because agents tend to repeat the same process. Then there's other agents who are massive, they're just listing agents and they're all about volume. And so if you put the right offer in front of them within the first 2 weeks of the campaign, you get it done. Because very often when buyers are in the market and they say, oh, there's an auction date, they sit on their hands typically until the last week before the auction, and they get the contract reviewed and they get the building and pass and everything else. We have already bought it by then. So I think sometimes buyers have this fear of going to auction, and we get clients like that as well. They say, you need to help me because I can't go to auction. It's like, well, that's all well and good, but this is a game of chess. You have to understand all the different pieces on the board and how are you going to move forward. You need to think ahead, and you do that by asking a lot of questions of the agents. What's the vendor situation? For example, if it's a divorcing couple, I can bet your bottom dollar that it will have to run to auction, okay? Because there's a reason these people are separating. It's because they're not getting on. And so if you want to do a deal prior to auction, there may be one party that is not going to agree. And so you're wasting your offer by giving away your hand prior to auction. So sometimes you're better off waiting in that decision. If it's a deceased estate, for example, as well, if mom and dad are going into a nursing home and there's a number of beneficiaries involved in the background, again, I would say be very careful, because you have a much lower chance of getting the deal across the line, because there's all these different peoples with all their own motivations, money. You're better off doing it at auction because it's a very clear process. So I think that is one of the biggest mistakes that I see buyers make, is that they try to impose what they want on the transaction. And at the end of the day, you've got something that they've got. So you've got to make it as easy as possible for them to say yes, so there's no point lowballing them. If you know that this is a very popular property, there's lots of people coming through the door, why would they sell it to you? When they know there's all these people coming through, you have to give them an offer that is at a level that says to them, am I sure that I'm going to get this money at auction? And you've got to make it as an attractive an offer as possible. So that means you do your due diligence prior, you get all your contract changes done, you've looked at the building and pest, and always get an independent building and pest, by the way, because the agents commissioned building and pests really are not worth the paper they're written on. I know they're only $49 or $79, but there's a reason why those building and pest inspectors get chosen, because there's no detail in them. So get your independent building and pest always, because then you can rely on that information. Okay, so you've got to get all your ducks lined up, and you got to go in with a really strong unconditional offer and time it. and ask questions in advance and say to the agent, listen, if I were to come in with an offer, what are your next steps going to be? Are you going to disclose the offer to the other buyers, or is it going to be a Dutch auction? Or, you've got to ask a lot of questions, like I said. And sometimes even your intention is to go and make an offer prior. If those answers that come back put you at a disadvantage, you're better off keeping your cards close to your chest and going to auction. So, yeah, once again, I think it's about understanding the equation, because the property market in many ways is not about property, it's about people. And understanding those people will help you become successful much quicker.
Absolutely.
Does that answer your question?
That's a great way to wrap up that question, Michelle. It's more of a game of psychology sometimes. That's all we have time for on the Savings Tip Jar podcast. Thanks so much for sharing your insights into the crazy Sydney property market. It always seems like it's crazy no matter what. Just thanks for sharing your thoughts once again.
Thanks,
You're
Michelle.
most welcome.
Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.